To offer us profound and insightful observations on this matter, we are privileged to have with us 5 extremely knowledgeable and outstanding intellectuals, namely ZAFAR Adeel, joining us from Canada, Shahbaz Khan, joining us from Beijing, Otto SPIJKERS, joining us from Oslo, and Huiping CHEN, joining us from China, Xiamen, and Kin Nini Tian, joining us from Myanmar. So welcome everyone, and many thanks for attending this webinar. I'm so glad to have you here. Now, before I begin, I need to tell you some housekeeping notes that this session will be recorded so that it could be widely circulated. If anyone has any concerns about that, do let me know. During the presentation, if the participants have any kind of questions, so please do not hesitate to put your questions in the Zoom chat, and we will address them during the Q&A session. And it will be much appreciated if you can write the name of the presenter the question is addressed to. You can also mention your name and affiliation if that's okay. Now, each presenter will get 10 minutes for the initial presentation remarks, which will be followed by the Q&A session, and then we will have some final concluding remarks. Let's start our first round, and we'll begin with our first presenter, Professor Dr. Kin Nini Tian, PhD Hydroinformatics, IHE Delft Institute for Water Education, the Netherlands. Professor Tian is a water management professional from last 44 years, and she has an worldwide experience in the inclusive water governance, integrated water resource management, and hydroinformatics. And currently, she is a chairperson of Water Mother Organization, G100 Eco Civilization Wing, Myanmar country chair, and advisor and expert, member of high-level experts, and the leader panel on the water and disaster, environmental chamber member in International Hydro Power Association. So for Mekong, she has been external advisor to Mekong program on water, environment, and resilience since 2004 to 2010. And she has also contributed for sustainable development and capacity building in Africa, Asia, and Europe from 1987 to 2012. And she has worked as a senior advisor to the dams and project development, United Nations Environment Program. And she is a chief of section water sustainable management in UNESCO before, and a vice president of the Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok. And she currently have interest in understanding human and water security for the perspective of the global system, change aiming to a happy, peaceful, and prosperous world with less collective ego and greed. So she's also founded the Myanmar Water Academy for the water education in Myanmar. So welcome, Professor Tian. Thank you very much for attending. And with your vast experience in hydroinformatics and the application of the information and communication technologies in addressing the serious water problems related to its equitable and efficient use, could you kindly appraise us on to what extent sustainable water governance policies is essential for governing the right to safe drinking water for everyone, along with the state's developmental goals? So Professor Tian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your very kind introduction. And thank you for invitation to take in this panel. For the sake of time, I will go straight to the answer that we have to, we have to do the instruments in order to manage and govern the water. So water policies are one of them, and I would say it is utmost important. It is so much very important, but it is easy to write the policies, but it is very, very difficult to make it implemented. So let me start from what is always known in solutions when they occur. We have problem and we always come up with solutions. However, to implement the solution is the most difficult part, like in water policies, because it needs many actors at many levels. All the stakeholders have to be involved. Also the geographical diversity, ethical diversity, and cultural diversity, these also are different. So even when we speak one word, everybody understands it in literal meaning. However, people understand differently from different background, different contexts. Therefore, these factors play important roles. Therefore, public consultations, transparency, information and data sharing, political will at the top government level, necessary support from focal ministry towards the ministry's civil servants. It is the administrative body, and the cooperation among national institutions and organizations. Above all, understanding of the role play of multi-level governance by the focal ministry and rule of law in the country. So you see, when we answer, is policy important? We say yes, policy important, but then if it is in the bookshelf, we cannot do anything. Therefore, these things, the ingredient of these policies are very important. So only after the fulfillment of above mentioned qualities, we can go out to negotiate and cooperate with fellow riparian countries. For example, I am experienced in Mekong Water Basin. You see, as your kind introduction, I was heavily involved from 2004 to 2010. But even before that, when I was in UNEP, I was involved in 2002 to 2004. So actually, the big organizations in Mekong also do their utmost, but we do not achieve to the extent we deserve, we human beings deserve. Therefore, we have to see where are the hiccups, where are the difficult points, and if we can smooth out these difficult points, we can do better cooperation. And that is the rule of policy. Do you want me to continue, or do you want me to pause at this moment?
Continue. You can exhaust your whole 10 minutes. You have not done it, so you can.
Okay, then I can go on with once the stage is reached, you see, in the country, be it Cambodia or be it Myanmar or Thailand or Malaysia, then we have this grouping of ASEAN, and ASEAN always uphold the Asian value. What is Asian value? It's very simple. Asian value uphold the value of the community and society over and above the individual. Here we go, the human rights. Human right is the individual right. Therefore, if we go with the ASEAN and Asian value, we have to put the society above the individuality. And then in some cases, it is very easy. And in other cases, it becomes impossible. Again, go to another factor that a lot of countries do not sign the international agreements. The question why is because they are afraid. They have a fear of losing the autonomy. Fear of losing the autonomy means they have the duty to prove to their voters within 4 to 5 years. Then their time is too short. They cannot go for long-term commitment. Even if they do like 30-year plan and sustainable development goals to fulfill by 2030, etc., yet the successive government will not honor the first 30-year plan. They will either alter or change. So to make all this work, we come up with the 6th paradigm of the water management, which is the new water management in hydroinformatics philosophy. So hydroinformatics philosophy say that it is actually by our founder of the hydroinformatics, late Professor Michael Abbott. Success of water management depends on the following: every project exists in an outer physical world and in an inner world of collective minds of stakeholders. So if we cannot merge technology and data and all these management techniques of outer world into the inner world of the collective minds of the stakeholders, we will not achieve the success of the projects, especially water projects. I will not name the organizations, but the organization's report itself said our water projects fail 50 to 60%, and they honestly admit it. How do we cure? Our cure is to go forward with the 6th paradigm and start making the new culture eco-civilization. That is very easy for some people and impossible for others. But the collective mind of water managers and water professionals, researchers, and UNESCO and UNEP and all other institutions, plus the activists, if we agree on the Peace Manifesto, 6 points manifesto from UNESCO, which was established in 2000, and also the manifesto of AEIOU, that I would explain when we have time, then I think we can do this collective consciousness and collective cooperation. Actually, the Chinese Confucius theory is a lot embedded in there. So I think we are not far away from peace and international collaboration through that.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Tian, for your very insightful and clear presentation, and reminding us that how important it is to have collective minds of stakeholders, that they must work together to achieve the results. So with this, now move on to the next presenter, who is Otto SPIJKERS. He is a professor of international law at Wuhan University, China Institute of Boundary and Ocean Studies, as well as its Research Institute of Environmental Law, and is a founding staff member of the International Water Law Academy. He's a managing editor of the Chinese Journal of Environmental Law. Prior to joining Wuhan University, he worked at the Utrecht Center for Waters, Ocean and Sustainability Law, and Netherlands Institute for the Law of the Sea at the Utrecht University. And he was also a visiting lecturer at the Peking University Law School in Xiamen and University China and International Water Law Program. And he has also been visiting professor in the University degli Studi, I think Cilantro, Italy, and also l'Université Catholique d'Afrique Centrale in Yaoundé, Cameroon. So he has worked and written his dissertation on the United Nations Evolution of Global Values and International Law at the Goethe Center of International Legal Studies in Leiden University, and he has published over 100 articles and books. He has worked as a public services coordinator at the Peace Palace Library as international consultant and coordinator for the United Nations International Law Fellowship Program, as intern for the Appeals Chamber of International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and also an intern for the Office of Legal Affairs of United Nations Headquarters. So Otto has actually studied basic of international relations at the University of Sussex, and he then studied international law at the University of Amsterdam, New York University School of Law, exchange student as an exchange student, at the Hague Academy of International Law, and he studied the philosophy at University of Amsterdam and the University of Malta. So he has obtained a diploma founded the long process as well. So welcome, Otto, and thank you very much for attending today. Now, with your vast experience, could you appraise us on the Sustainable Development Goals in the light of the 20th anniversary of human rights to water? So floor is yours, Otto. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this wonderful event. So I'm actually speaking to you from my hotel room in Oslo, where I'm now attending a conference, but I'm indeed a full-time professor with Wuhan University and enjoying that very much. So I will speak about the human right to water and its relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's interesting that I speak after the previous speaker because she referred to Asian values as preferring the community over the individual. So I am educated in the West and I believe very strongly in the human rights approach, so that the society only exists for the happiness of its people. So ultimately it's all about the happiness of the individual. So that is very strongly my approach to life and to my work as a scholar. So I'm very much a human rights scholar in that sense. So I will speak about the human right of sustainable access to water as reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals. And I will address the following question that was raised to me. How does SDG 6, so that's the water goal, how does that facilitate the implementation of an international human right to sustainable access to water? And my main argument will be that SDGs and the human right to water, they sort of cross-fertilize, and together they produce a human right of sustainable access to water. So let me begin with the human right to water and look at reference to sustainability in that right. So there's no explicit mention of the human right to water in any of the international human rights treaties that we know. But in 2002, so that's now exactly 20 years ago, the Committee for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights issued its General Comment 15, in which it derived the human right to water from inter alia Article 11 of the Covenant, and that is on the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. So there's no mention of water, there is a mention of food and clothing and housing. So many people wonder, so why is clothing mentioned explicitly but not water? That is indeed very strange. But the idea was that this is not an exhaustive list, so water could clearly be included in that list. Because how can you have an adequate standard of living without water? It seems obvious that you need water. And in this general comment of 2002, we also read that the manner of the realization of the right to water must be sustainable, ensuring that the right can be realized for present and future generations. So there's a clear reference to the sustainability aspect of this human right to water. So let me now turn to the Sustainable Development Goals, and now I will do the opposite thing. So I will look at references to human rights in the Sustainable Development Goals. And in Sustainable Development Goal 6, so that's the water goal, SDG 6, we do find various implicit references to the internationally recognized human right to water, but there's no explicit reference to that human right. In fact, there's no reference to human rights at all. But most important is SDG target 6.1, so that's the first target, which says, and now I quote, that by 2030, so that's already in 8 years, all states must achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. So this must be achieved in all states in the world in 8 years. That's very ambitious. And this reference to safe and affordable drinking water for all is clearly derived from human rights language. And to measure progress in meeting this target, states must constantly report annually on the proportion of the population using safely managed drinking water services. And this proportion must reach 100% by 2030. So you might wonder, where are we now? So we are now at around 75% globally, but there are major differences across the globe. And this figure of 75% has not really changed much since 2015, when the SDGs began to operate. So already when we started to try and achieve this goal, we were already very close to accomplishing it. And since then, in the 8 years that followed, we didn't really accomplish much more. And most notably, sub-Saharan Africa is seriously lagging behind. So maybe 75% of the world's population has access to water, but in some countries, the percentage is much, much, much lower. So these two processes, the SDG process and the human rights process, they can cross-fertilize and produce what could be called a human right of sustainable access to water. So that's all good news, but there is a reason for caution, and the previous speaker already referred to some of these reasons. So first of all, and this is more conceptual reason for caution, I think that the human rights-based approach to SDG 6 might distort the balance a bit between the three pillars of sustainable development. So there's the ecological pillar, but there's the social pillar, and then there's the economic pillar. And by focusing too much on human rights aspects, we maybe make the social pillar a bit too big, and we forget about the ecological and the economic pillar. But there's also a more realist reason for caution, and that is that formal legal recognition of the human right of sustainable access to water is not enough. And the future does not look bright if we look at implementation of this right. So climate change and privatization of freshwater resources are seen as particularly dangerous challenges to realizing this right. And most of the water, I don't know if people are aware of this, but most of the water that we use for drinking and sanitation, we actually take from underground, from aquifers, and not from lakes and rivers, but from underground water reserves, groundwater. And climate change directly affects this natural groundwater recharge by the intense and more frequent droughts, but also by intense and more frequent rainfall. And so these underground reserves, they have more and more difficulty in replenishing themselves in the way that they used to. And also another problem caused by climate change is that global sea level rise has led to extensive seawater intrusion into our groundwater resources. And if seawater enters these groundwater resources, then they become unfit for drinking and sanitation. They salinate, they become salt. In many states, water is owned, in quotations, by private parties, not by the state or by the community. And these private parties, they often don't really consider themselves bound by the SDG framework or by the human rights framework, and they don't really see any responsibilities deriving therefrom for them. That's another big problem. I'm not sure that's a big problem in Asia, but it is a problem in other parts of the world. And a third problem in implementation of this right is that many aquifers are polluted by agriculture and mainly by the introduction of nitrates and pesticides into the water. That's another big problem in the realization of the human right of sustainable access to water for everybody. So to conclude, I think that much has been achieved regarding the legal recognition of the human right of sustainable access to water over the last 20 years. Since the general comment was issued in 2002, and that is really a reason to celebrate. We should not all be too pessimistic and just start crying over the terrible state the world is in. It's not like that. But of course, there is also reason for caution, and especially when it comes to implementation. I hope that in the 20 years lying ahead of us, we can accomplish some important, we can make some important progress. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Otto, for this very clear and excellent observations on water as a human right, and as is reflected in the SDGs, but there are challenges with realization implementation, like you mentioned. Now, let me welcome my third presenter, Professor Shahbaz Khan, who is the Director of UNESCO Office in Beijing and UNESCO Representative to Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Japan, Mongolia, People's Republic of China, and Republic of Korea. So the Professor Khan actually joined UNESCO in 2008 at its headquarters as Chief of the Water and Sustainable Development Section. Then he served as a Director of the Regional Bureau for Science in Asia and the Pacific in Jakarta, Indonesia, and UNESCO representative to Indonesia, Brunei, Darussalam, Malaysia, the Philippines, and the Timor-Leste from 2015 to 2021. And Professor Khan has worked in Australia, France, Indonesia, Pakistan in various research consultancy and policy positions. And before joining UNESCO, he was a professor and director at the Charles Sturt University, Australia. His work has been widely recognized and has been got many accolades for it. For instance, in 2019, he received the China Friendship Award, Great Wall Friendship Award, China in 2017, the Federation of Engineering Institute of Asia, and the Pacific Engineer of the Year in 2016, and UNESCO Team Award for Managing the Hydro Hazards in 2009, Land and Water Australia's Eureka Prize in 2007, and Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization Medal in 2007 as well, Biennial Medal of the Modeling and Stimulation of Society of Australia and New Zealand. He also received that. So Professor Khan has held several honorary academic positions, such as the adjunct professor at the University of Canberra and Western Sydney University, Australia, adjunct professor at the Lincoln University, New Zealand, distinguished professor at the National University of Science and Technology in Pakistan, and distinguished professor at the Capital Normal University, China. And he also holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Engineering and Technology, Lahore, Pakistan, a Master's of Science degree in Water Resource Technology Management, and a doctorate in Civil Engineering from the University of Birmingham. He was also holding a Master's degree in International Environmental Law from Macquarie University, Australia, and Master's degree in Applied Environmental Economics from the Imperial College London, United Kingdom, and an honorary doctorate Environment and Development from the National University of Malaysia. So he also has a doctorate of Science from the University of Birmingham. So I think there's lots of things that he has done. So welcome, Professor Khan, with your vast experience and working as a director of UNESCO office in Beijing, and also being a representative of UNESCO for various countries. It would be excellent if you could talk about UNESCO's international hydrological programs for water-based realization of water security. So floor is yours, Professor Khan.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Long, for such a very generous introduction. Maybe I don't deserve that. So I will give you some ideas. I prepared some slides. I hope it is okay to show you some ideas what UNESCO is doing. And my colleagues hopefully will be able to relate to them. And I'm very privileged to know some of our panelists. So let me put it in the full screen mode. So I hope everyone can see it. So International Hydrological Program is not a new program. There was an international decade from 1955 to 1965. So water is on the minds of United Nations and UNESCO as a specialized agency in education, science and culture, communication, information and social and human sciences, has been working on water since 1955. The program started in 1965. Here you have a very beautiful picture here. This is from Yunnan in China. A lady, indigenous lady, looking into a landscape where rice is so important. So you can imagine local and indigenous rights. That's where the law comes very importantly. How do we make sure we don't leave anyone behind, especially marginalized groups? So UNESCO's work is also linking with local indigenous knowledge, water management, water science. So I will give you some ideas from UNESCO's recent work. So as I introduced the International Hydrological Program. International Hydrological Program is going through its 9th phase, 2022, which is this year, to 2029. Our focus is science for a water-secure world in a changing environment. But as you have introduced, Dr. Loon, with my background, you can imagine science cannot just solve the problem. So we are serving these countries with law and policy, as well as with economics, local indigenous knowledge, social human sciences, very importantly, social inequalities. So this program is underpinned by all of that kind of knowledge. Integrated water resource management is the buzzword, which brings all these disciplines together under global change, climate change, also population change, which is a very big issue, also issues related to quality, issues related to inequalities and access. So water governance, I put it broadly, institutions, laws, policies, economics, how science can help bring better options from management of disasters to providing water security. So scientific research and innovation, we work with the universities as well, with several universities, including with Wuhan. We just established a new UNESCO chair at Wuhan University. I will be visiting Wuhan very shortly. So scientific research and innovation, water education, especially linking with 4th industrial revolution, use of technologies. And in this education, the law and policy part is very important. We have a very special UNESCO center, which ZAFAR knows very well also, in Dundee. Patricia Waters, who also works at Wuhan University now, has been one of the initiators of water law into International Hydrological Program, and I used to be on the board of that center. And we had a program called Hydrology for Environmental Life and Policy at a river basin level. So that's where we're looking into data, its gaps, water management, and human rights-based approaches. And we are linking, of course, with the SDGs, SDG 6 principally, but with all other SDGs, because water is the connector. Water links other SDGs, and that's where we have the link with data information, financing, also governance, also innovation. So UNESCO has a very strong focus on SDG number 6. So within the United Nations system, like, for example, in China, we have a UN country team. Water is very important. And I am chairing a very important group there, persons with disabilities. How do we make persons with disability be part of the action as well, leaving no one behind? And water is a very important part of it. So linking water and climate change. Our work is integrated across United Nations, especially with WMO, UNDP, UNICEF, and others. As a practitioner of integrated water resources management, I would like to draw the attention of colleagues of this United Nations report. ZAFAR Adeel used to be UN Water's chair at one stage. And this report, what we call, is the United Nations World Water Development Report, hosted by UNESCO in Perugia, Italy. And this report in 2019 focused on leaving no one behind. I strongly recommend colleagues to read it. This is an important reference. The chapter number 1 is water as a human right. And human right-based approaches, universality of human rights, invisibility, interdependence, accountability of law, and IWRM. There is a kind of merger between the two, because IWRM is trying to achieve economic and environmental efficiencies, but at the same time, equity, equality, participation, and governance. So IWRM is very much about human rights. This picture is from the report, and there is a very interesting chapter there. Also in this report, there is a very interesting analysis for every region. For Asia-Pacific region, which is the focus for today, I would like to draw your attention that Central Asia and South Asia, Eastern Asia and Southeastern Asia, Oceania, excluding Australia and New Zealand, small islands. In small islands, the problem is big for water, which is safely managed, water, which is provided as a human right, is a very big challenge for the SIDS, for small island and developing nations. For maybe other parts of Asia, the progress is more. But if you really look into safely managed water, it is not around 60%. I draw your attention to SDG board by SCAT. That's where you can find the latest figures on a country by country basis as well. I do not have time to go into every country, but this is the overall picture. So Central Asia, South Asia, big problem. In the Eastern Asia and Southeastern Asia, Eastern Asia is where I am now, and with Japan and Korea, you can imagine there is a lot more in the urban, but rural, still managed supplies is a problem. And Southeast Asia, ASEAN countries, very big problem for safely managed water, and pollution is a big issue. Okay, also what we are doing, fitting into the United Nations system, there is a very big UN conference in 2023, where IHP will be focusing with World Water Development on groundwater, which was mentioned by Professor Otto. Is a very important part of the work. This year, our World Water Development Report is making invisible visible. So next year, our focus is the groundwater. Climate change and resilience, very important areas which will bring, we will bring to this conference with the UN special part of the disaster risk reduction. So disasters is a very important part of realizing human rights and safety. Water and culture, very, very quickly, is a very important part of realizing human rights or human rights-based approaches. So in this regard, looking into river ecosystems, human systems, and bringing this rhythm together and understanding together, and local indigenous knowledge, leaving no one behind, is a key. So my office, we are organizing a Great Rivers Forum. This is in 2018. We bring people from all over the world. And we have now the next one happening this year, which we are leading with the Wuhan city. And there is a very special museum there. My colleagues just mentioned about society, environment, and economy, the three pillars for the SDGs. In China, what is coming now is the ecological civilization thought by President Xi Jinping, bringing the politics and culture together. Eco-civilization, which can go from commercial industrial civilization to ecological civilization to human rights-based approaches. This area needs to be researched together. And I invite your university to work with us. And that's where we bring policy, technology, education, and culture. UNESCO has a very special program on culture. We have more than 1,100 World Heritage Sites, and many of them National Heritage Sites. We have biosphere reserves, as well as we have global geoparks. So bringing these programs together with living heritage, intangible heritage, we are working on a culture and human-based approach to water management. And that's where this year is the 50th year of the World Heritage Convention. So coming back to the conventions and laws. Also very important is how do we bring education for sustainable development, global citizenship education, education which helps understand who we are, from where we come, how we need to make sure there is nobody marginalized, the knowledge of the human rights, as well as the knowledge which is coming from science and technology. So global citizenship education, we have a special UNESCO Category 2 center, which is in Korea, which has a special focus on water as well. Okay, learning from the book, this year we are going to publish this book where there are many case studies. It's already ready, and I will send a copy to you and colleagues who may be interested. So looking into the tipping points, looking into the issues related to intergenerational equity and intragenerational equity, and looking into how can we come towards better sustainability, learning from our culture and learning from our values, and looking into human rights-based approaches. So this book is from 2018 forum, which will be published this year, and the next forum is this year, where we'll be looking into many of these issues. So as you introduced, 2008, I went from Australia to Paris, and I was leading this very important section. This is a booklet I produced with colleagues, linked to Right to Water, available online. You can download it. Some very simple messages which can add to our discussion, and then I will finish here. Very important to understand is UN and UNESCO is working in an intergovernmental. We are intergovernmental. UNESCO is a specialized agency, 193 member states. So member states must comply to their human rights obligations. This is a gentle way to ask the member states, please look into water as a human right. To my knowledge, South Africa is the only nation which tried but not successfully to provide water as a basic human right. Then looking into compliance issues, looking into non-discrimination issues, looking into gender equality, accountability, and rights for the indigenous people, and making sure leaving no one behind is really fully realized. Also very important is the poor people who are now being forced out of the mainstream in many of the countries because simply they cannot afford food. So poverty link, the food link, the energy link, back with the water. How do we make sure we empower rights, which like right to education, right to water, right to be able to live safely from disasters. So all of that needs to be done. Water and sanitation must be looked together. And also very importantly, financing. And that's what we are trying to do all the time to bring it to the attention. So with that, I thank you, and hopefully this will spark some ideas in the minds of colleagues. So UNESCO is ready to link with any one of you, including your university, Dr. Long. So this is a part of not just my work, from member states, 193 countries working together with many universities, many UNESCO centers and chairs, and with real water managers from Asia Pacific and the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your brilliant informative remarks regarding the UNESCO's International Hydrological Program for realization of water security, and reminding us how important it is to have integrated water management programs and integrate different disciplines and cultures and stakeholders to make the real change. So that includes policy, technology, cultures, and taking a human center to human perspective on the water as a human right. So this afternoon, my fourth presenter is Huiping CHEN. He's a professor of international law at Xiamen University School of Law and director of International Economic Law Institute. She received her PhD degree in international law from Xiamen University in 1999, and she teaches international investment law and public international law. And her research fields focus on international investment law and international water law, and she has rich publications in both Chinese and English. She was a visiting professor at Leiden University, Fulbright researcher at the Georgetown University, Freeman Fellow at the University of Illinois, visiting professorial fellow at the Herbert Smith Freehills China International Business and Economic Law Center at the University of New South Wales, Sydney. And she is Secretary General of the Administrative Council of Xiamen Academy of International Law and Deputy Secretary General of the Chinese Society of International Economic Law. So welcome, Huiping. It's great to have you here. With your background, could you kind of explain to us to what extent has the investment tribunals actually recognized the existence of human rights to water? So if so, how has investment tribunals actually demonstrated their willingness to impose human rights obligations on the states? And can the amicus curiae mechanism in the investment arbitration promote the realization of human rights to water? So floor is yours, Professor Chen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Long, for your kind invitation. It's really my honor and pleasure to be invited. And may I share the screen?
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So can you see it clearly?
Yeah, we can see it clearly. Thank you.
Yeah. To answer Dr. Long's questions, I will address three issues. So I want to discuss the human right to water in the context of international investment law. So this field could be new or strange for many of you because this is quite different from the normal human rights context. But I want to say that foreign investment can promote the realization of the human right to water. However, on the other hand, there could be some kind of disputes, and then the disputes will be submitted to international arbitration. And then for arbitrators, whether they recognize or not the human right to water as a justification. So this is the major, I will address three major issues. Okay, probably you cannot see it clearly. Okay, so first I will address the interaction between, I will address the interaction between human right to water and foreign investment. And then the next related question is, when there's a dispute, then how human right to water could be an argument to justify the host state's action in investment arbitration. And finally, in the process of investment arbitration, amicus curiae jumped in, and then they can play their role to implement the human right to water in the international investment law. I made very brief slides so that you can catch the major ideas. First, let's look at the interaction between human right to water and foreign investment. As the speakers mentioned just now, that human right to water was formally accepted and confirmed in 2002. However, in 1990s, at the international level, the idea of human right to water has already been mentioned in some international documents and also in the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. However, for many developing countries, they have got the obligation to provide safe and clean drinking water to their people. And mostly they do it through their public funds and public sectors. However, sometimes for them, they do not have adequate funds or technology to provide. In this context, some international institutions, for example, the World Bank, they suggested to those developing countries to privatize their water sector. And during the privatization, foreign investments are invited to come. And that's why many foreign investors in the water sector, they participated in the water sector in some developing countries. For example, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Philippines, in Argentina, and some other many other developing countries. So on the one hand, foreign investment actually can contribute to the realization of human right to water. But there are not always good news. There are some bad news, because some foreign investment could not really provide the water qualified. For example, sometimes the quality of the water has got problem. The water they provided has got special odor, and there are some bacteria, or they raise the tariff and the people could not afford the water. So the tension between foreign investment and the local people arose. And sometimes foreign host states, they had to take some measures to terminate the concession contract between the host state and the foreign investors. And in this context, the disputes arise. So in the early 2000s, there are several investment disputes arose between foreign investors and the host states, including Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Tanzania. So there are several cases. And we know that foreign investment are protected by international investment treaties. So many contracting parties to the treaties, they promise to foreign investors that their properties will not be expropriated. They will be treated fairly and equitably, and something else. However, foreign investors, they claim that if you cancel my concession contract or the lease contract to operate the water sector, that means you expropriated my property, my investment. And then, according to investment treaties, foreign investors have got a right to submit the dispute for international investment arbitration. So the disputes are referred to international tribunals, for arbitration. And that happened in the early 2000s. However, in the process of the arbitration, normally it takes about 5 to 10 to 15 years to hear the case and to finally decide the case. So during the process of the 5 to 10 years, the human right to water was confirmed. First in 2002 was confirmed by United Nations, and later they also confirmed in 2010 and 2013. And because of the confirmation and the further development of the concept of human right to water, for many host states, they use the human right to water as an argument to justify its actions. For example, Argentina, it mentions that, yes, according to international investment treaties, I have got the obligation to provide foreign investment, not to expropriate their properties, not to cancel the concession contracts or the lease contracts. However, I am also under international human rights treaties. I have got the obligation to provide people with water of safe and clean drinking water, and also the water should be affordable by the local people. So actually, the host states are in a dilemma of the fulfillment of the different obligations under different treaties. The treaty under investment treaties and the obligation under human rights treaties. So, and many states, they claim that the human rights obligation should prevail over the treaty law, the investment treaty obligations. However, on the part of the tribunal says that for me, I only look at the investment treaties. I am not allowed to look at the human rights treaties because this is not in my mandate. And so in almost all the investment treaties in the early treaties, there was no human rights obligations, human rights provisions in the investment treaties. So for the arbitrators, they will say, sorry, we cannot consider the human right to water as an argument. If you cancel the concession contract to operate the water facilities, it is expropriation. You have to compensate. So this is what the early tribunals say. But later on, with the further development and the popular acceptance of the concept of human right to water, so later on, the tribunals recognize that, yes, there exists the human right to water. I recognize it, but I still could not decide in favor of foreign the host states. But because of this dilemma, the host states confronted, and also because of the tribunals, they could not find human rights provisions in investment treaties. So even if they recognize the human right to water, they cannot really take them in their decisions. So later on, many countries, they incorporate the human rights provisions into the newly concluded investment treaties. And because now there are many new investment treaties, they have the provision of human rights. So for future investment dispute related to human rights to water, they can find legal basis to help them. So this is a good thing. And then I will look at the contribution by amicus curiae. Amicus curiae means the friend of courts, and they are not parties to the disputes, and they are not judges, they are not arbitrators, they are they are a third party dispute. They are third parties. That means they are not really involved in the disputes. However, they can try to assist judges or arbitrators by providing them extra and different information, expertise, experience, or insights. So the real purpose of amicus curiae is that they can provide some special expertise, special information, and insights to help the arbitrators or to help the judges to make correct decisions. So for those water-related investment disputes, some NGOs and local NGOs and international NGOs, especially those institutes, for example, like International Investment Institutes, Sustainable Development Institutes, they jump in as amicus curiae. And then because they are jump in, but okay, let's come back to the investment arbitration. For international investment arbitration, the amicus curiae mechanism was not provided in the arbitration rules. But for those water-related investment disputes, some NGOs jump in and claim that we want to be involved in the standing of amicus curiae. And for the first two cases, the tribunals decided, no, we will not recognize your standing. We will not accept you as amicus curiae. But later on, some other tribunals, they say, okay, yeah, this could be a new mechanism and could be a new way for other people to jump in for the public interest. And so the first 2 or 3 cases are really related of the human right to water investment disputes. And this contributes to the establishment of the amicus curiae mechanism in the international investment arbitration. And because now the amicus curiae is already being widely accepted, so in the future, if there are any more human right to water related investment disputes, the more and more NGOs can jump in the standing of amicus curiae. So in this way, they can promote the implementation of human right to water. And this is the procedural contribution. The amicus curiae also made some substantive contribution. For the substantial contribution, first, amicus curiae, they had to receive approval by the tribunal to be amicus curiae. And then who can be amicus curiae? They show that local people, individuals, and the local NGOs and international NGOs, especially those NGOs who are very active in international tribunals, not only investment tribunals, but also some other criminal tribunals, WTO, panels. So now more and more this kind of NGOs, they pay attention to the human right to water related investment disputes and jump in to support the realization of the human right to water. And on the other hand, the amicus curiae, they can submit the submissions to the tribunals. And in their submissions, they try to argue that human right to water, it is a kind of human right and it should be recognized. As I mentioned just now, at the beginning, some tribunals did not recognize human right to water, but amicus curiae promoted that and tried to persuade them that human right to water has already been widely accepted. And this actually helped to change the mind of the tribunal. So gradually, the tribunal will consider the human right to water in the decision of the cases. And we found out that in recent years, in some of the cases, tribunals really consider the human right to water. So this is a contribution by the amicus curiae. On the other hand, those NGOs, especially international NGOs, when because they participate in these water-related investment disputes, so they've got experience and they know the problems. So they also participate in some other seminars and also meetings, conferences related to the development of human right to water. And they strongly recommend them to to further develop the concept of human right to water, and also to incorporate human rights provisions in some other investment treaties. So and now many investment treaties have got human rights provisions. And so these are also part of the contribution made by amicus curiae. So now, because they have got the arbitrators have got the idea of human right to water, and because the new investment treaties mostly have got some human rights provisions, this will further provide legal basis for future human right to water related investment disputes. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very informative presentation, because it actually provides us a new perspective on looking at water as a human right and how foreign investment can actually promote the human rights to water. But it has challenges, and there could be a dispute, foreign investment disputes, and the tribunals in such disputes have confirmed human rights to water, which should be actually safe and affordable water to local people. And then how amicus curiae mechanisms have also, in the interest of public, promoted the realization, this goal of protecting the human rights as to water. I think this is a very, very interesting sort of an take on this water as a human right. So thank you so much for it. Now I will this afternoon my final presenter is Dr. Adeel ZAFAR. He serves as an executive director of the Pacific Water Research Center and as professor of professional practice at Simon Fraser University's School of Sustainable Energy Engineering, and he has over 25 years of experience in the broad range of environmental science and policy issues, including 18 years of serving as a senior United Nations official. And he has also served in a number of international leadership roles, and his research focuses on the intersection of water security, technological innovations, and community engaged research activities. And he is a firm believer in community engagement and social mobilization. As an avid Rotarian for many years, he has served on the board of director of the Rotary Club of the Hamilton. And presently, he is a member of the Simon Fraser Community Council, advises community living in British Columbia on issues of concern to adults with special needs. So welcome, Adeel. So it's a great pleasure to have you here. With your vast knowledge and interdisciplinary expertise covering energy, efficiency, sustainability, and policy into consideration, and while taking this discussion a bit further from the first speaker, so you have the old burden to tell us how can we ensure reasonable and equitable access to water, to people, especially in Asia, where we see the situation is much worse, and what role can the China play as an upper riparian to improve the water security, in Asia, considering they have lots of dam building projects in the upper reaches. So you can appraise us on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fozia, for such a gracious introduction. And also thank you for organizing this very interesting melding of minds. I think we have some very interesting perspectives around the table. So, I find it very stimulating. Before I start, it's customary here in Canada to recognize that we are situated on traditional and Indigenous territories. And here in British Columbia, where I'm located, these are territories that belong to a number of First Nations who never ceded this to anyone, and they were obviously colonized. And I particularly want to identify 3 First Nations that lay claim on the land where I'm sitting right now, and these are Coquitlam, Stolo, and Katzie First Nations. And you see the beautiful scenery behind me is the backdrop in which I live. So it's a real privilege to be here. And there's actually quite a lot we can learn from these Indigenous communities and their knowledge, which goes back to 14,000 years of oral history. So lots to learn and lots of information to bring to this conversation. Now, coming back to your questions, I think it's quite appropriate that you ask these questions. And I think my colleagues have helped me quite a lot in building the base to answer those questions by looking at the human rights perspectives, looking at the institutional dimensions and the role of UN in addressing many of those, and in talking about the international law and how it intersects with many of these issues. So I think embedded in your question is a notion of a problem. So there is a problem. We know that when you spoke about at the beginning, 2.2 billion people without access to safe water, a vast majority of those people are actually living in Asia. And if we can address the safe drinking water problems in Asia, I think we've solved about 75 to 80% of the world's water problem. So it is no minor challenge in that sense. And I think there's 4 underlying challenges or problems which exacerbate. So I think we have to understand them, or at least lay them out before we start to address how we can overcome them. So the first one is that there is an uneven and inequitable resource distribution of water resources throughout the Asian region. And I'm overgeneralizing a little bit, but when you look at many of the major river basins in the Asia and Pacific region, what we find is that where the population densities are typically do not overlap with where the major water resources are. And what's even worse is that as a result of climate change, we see that the distribution of those resources is getting worse. The second problem is that there is a lack of adequate investment in the water domain in general, and specifically around provisioning of safe drinking water to different communities and different populations. And underlying this problem of lack of investment is the notion of affordability, which I think Shahbaz briefly touched on, meaning that governments are typically not investing enough in providing these safe drinking water resources to people at a level which is affordable for them. The third challenge is that there is a major technological and management deficit. And this is basically, at the end of the day, a human capacity gap in Asia. And again, I'm overgeneralizing a little bit, but I think when we look at some of the larger countries in terms of population, we see this as a common problem, that the number of experts which are needed to solve the water problems are not, we don't find them. And I think this is where the UN system in general and UNESCO in particular has a very specific role to build capacity. And I know that the International Hydrological Program has been doing that fairly intensively. Similarly, the UN Development Program has also been undertaking efforts at regional scale capacity building. And the fourth problem is institutional deficits. And what I mean by that is that the capacity of governance, the integrated water resource management that Nini talked about at the very beginning, to implement those elements, you need institutions, not just organizations, but you need laws, you need customary practices that can allow us to address the underpinnings of effective governance. So those are the four challenges. I'll repeat them quickly. So uneven and inequitable distribution of water resource, lack of adequate investment and affordability problems, technological and management deficits leading to or as a result of human capacity gaps, and institutional deficits. So how do we start to address those? So now I'm coming to answer your question as briefly as I can. So in terms of the water distribution issue, we do have an international framework, which is the 1997 Water Courses Convention, which has been around, as the name says, but it actually came into force quite recently. And it provides the framing for collaboration between countries, within countries, in terms of how water is managed and how it's made available to different populations. And what we find interesting is that many of the larger countries in Asia have not signed on to this treaty. So I'm thinking of India, China, Pakistan. I think are some of the bigger countries in terms of population, which have not signed on to this convention. So that's something that needs to be addressed. Similarly, with particular reference to China, and Shahbaz would know this much better than I think the general approach that China has had about managing of transboundary water resources it shares with its neighbors is to have bilateral agreements. And we know from experience elsewhere that the way to solve this is to get all the riparians on the table at the same time. And that's an approach that China would need to move towards to actually have these multilateral agreements. And there's good platforms already in existence. There's Mekong River Basin Commission is there. We also have the Indus River Treaty, which coincidentally, China is a part of that basin as well. And China also sits on top of the Ganges and Brahmaputra basins. And China also sits on top of the Salamine River Basin, which is shared with Myanmar and Thailand. So because China sits at the headwaters of many of these river basins, it has a fairly significant role to play in terms of addressing this uneven and inequitable resource distribution for water. And I would just mention a couple of elements which can help us in moving in this direction. One is to look at trade as a way of facilitating these relationships, and it sometimes opens doors for collaboration around water, which is otherwise very, very difficult. Similarly, the nexus between water, energy, and food means that we can also look at the sharing of energy resources, the sharing of food, which makes it easier to have these type of transboundary conversations. Let me come to the second problem, and that's the lack of investment. And I think there's three major players which can help address the problem in Asia. The first one, and the obvious one, is the national governments. And there are significant resources available within national governments. It's a matter of reprioritizing and focusing on addressing the safe water challenges. And the Sustainable Development Goals provide an ideal framework for this reprioritization of water, of investments around water. The second major player is the private sector. And we have to bring in the private sector, incentivize it, and at the same time, make sure that the public interests are protected. But they have the capacity, they have the resources, and they have the experience for scaling up in a very rapid way, which is something that we need quite desperately in Asia. And I think conceptually we've talked about the comparison between the water sector and the mobile phone sector, the cell phone industry, which has had great success in reaching out and providing access across the board and across social strata. So that's the kind of model that we need to develop for engaging private sector in the provisioning of water as well. And the third major player in this is the international community, both through provisioning of aid and also through, as I mentioned before, the UN institutions and organizations can play a significant role. Now I come to the third challenge, which is the deficits in terms of technology and management and the underpinning human capacity gaps. So we have to focus quite specifically on targeted knowledge generation and development of capacity. And one model that has worked very well, and when I was working for the UN, we partnered quite frequently with UNESCO to use this south-to-south cooperation, which means that it's the developing countries sharing their experiences with each other and building their capacity mutually. And we found that this was much more effective than the north to south model of developed countries coming and telling basically developing countries how to address their challenges. And to my last point, in terms of strengthening institutions, there is already significant goals which are embedded within the Sustainable Development Goal framework, and particularly around partnerships. And we think that building those partnerships can help build the institutions, and again, sharing of experiences across countries can be a very strong way of doing that. And I'll just add in a footnote, there is a major conference that just concluded yesterday in Dushanbe, and thanks to the wonderful technology, I was able to participate in that, where my center partnered with another Canadian entity and UNESCO to organize a discussion around this knowledge generation and capacity development. And there are some key findings and action items coming out from that conference, which will directly feed into the major UN conference on water next year in 2023. So there's lots of ideas which are coming through, a lot of ideas that are specifically targeted to addressing the challenges in Asia. And I'd be happy to discuss those in more detail if time permits. And I hope we can have maybe a follow-up conversation again to start to unpack some of those. So I give the floor back to you, Fozia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this excellent initial remarks and providing this information on, raising us on the ground realities and how the problems such as uneven water distribution, lack of investment, major technological gaps, or even institutional deficit actually play a role in preventing equitable access to water. And of course, China has a role to play because it's authoritarian, and it can make a positive difference by, like trade you mentioned, or nexus, between food, energy, and water, and how the private investment can help to improve the situation. So I think that after this excellent round of presentation by my brilliant presenters, we have a clear sort of a description of the contemporary issues that prevent the realization of water as a human right, and how important it is to, in practice, take a multidisciplinary, integrated approach to this problem, because obviously it's a process, and we need to work towards its realization, and all people and stakeholders must work together. Now, with this, I will now move on to the audience questions. If the audience have any question, I welcome you to turn on your microphone and ask the question, or you can simply write it in the chat box, and I can read it for you, or you can read it yourself. Okay, so I can see. Okay, let me see the chat if there are any questions there. I cannot see any questions. So I mean, even if the panelists have questions for each other, that you have any clarification required at this moment, you can ask. Yes, I think that Adeel has a question. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question for Otto, and thank you for that very interesting discussion around whether human right to water is actually beneficial or not. And I'm kind of in the same thought process as you, that it sometimes poses more challenges than it helps. But I wanted to ask you to expand a little bit on how it distorts the 3 pillars of sustainability. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on what that distortion is and how that actually practically comes into play.
Yeah, okay, that's a very interesting question. So, so if you focus too much on the human rights aspect, then I think the risk is that access to safe water for sanitation and drinking becomes a right that pertains to the individual and that can be claimed by the individual from the state in which he or she resides. So then the individual can basically say, I have the right to water, so give me water now, immediately, and make sure it's of good quality and sufficient quantity to satisfy my immediate water needs. And if this is the whole story, then we don't really look too much at future generations' interests in water or the environment itself. There's now a lot of scholars that are looking at rights of nature or that move beyond this sort of anthropocentric approach to natural resources. So those kind of approaches, they risk being snowed under. But at the same time, I must emphasize that I am a human rights lawyer. So I actually have much more sympathy with the human rights approach than with the rights of nature, that kind of approaches. But I do think there should be room for these other approaches too. It should not be all about satisfying the individual's immediate water needs today. That's what I meant to say.
Great, thank you. Can I add maybe one more point that we've discovered in some of these discussions around human rights? And that's the expectation from many people once they discover that there is a human right, that water is provided to them free of cost. And there is this conflation somehow that because it's a right, it should be given for free, and that sort of discounts the cost for treating and supplying and managing all of that water. And that creates I think, a fairly difficult situation within countries where, and I think you mentioned South Africa encountered riots where people said, you know, where's our free water? So there's, I think, some challenges in sort of materializing this right into actual delivery of water.
Yeah, but I always find that very strange because there's also a human right to food, but nobody is saying give us our free food. And there's a human right to adequate housing, and nobody is saying give us a house for free. So I never really understand this kind of response to the human right to water. Of course, you have to pay for it.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting discussion. You're right, Otto, in many ways that, it's a little bit a different approach to it. But at the end of the day, the water is the basic need. I mean, it's so linked. That goes back to what Adeel was mentioning, the energy, water, food, and access, so connected. And in fact, in my perspective, I think that the water is the most important in that, because if there's no water, there's no food. I mean, you can't really grow it, It's a sort of it's a basic fact. But again, it's a process. It takes time to give it. I think it hasn't actually got a place that it needs. I mean, at the moment, the adequate, like what Professor Khan was mentioning, there is no country that actually gives, right to human right to water. It's a struggle because it has economic aspects to it as well. So I think that let me see. Let me see if I have questions. I think let's discuss a little bit more on the dam building on the upper reaches. How that actually can affect the water quality. So the question that I have is an open-ended question. Anyone can answer it. So how does actually the dam building on the upper reaches affect the water quality and quantity as well? And how can it be avoided? Especially, let's think about it from the Chinese perspective. Because China is sitting at the waterhead. And Nini, maybe I'll go to you first because you have been working in Mekong. So could you give us some, thoughts on this? Nini, can you hear me?
Sorry, I hear partially because of the rain. May I ask you to repeat?
Yes, please. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's so because you have been working in the Mekong, you have a lot of experience there. And I just wondered whether you could actually mention a few things about the dam building in the upper reaches and how it actually affects the water quality and the quantity as well.
Yeah, both. Actually, I was also writing down the note on that. Both actually, and the quantity has been lesser and the quality has been dirtier. But we cannot really influence the decision makers from the upstream countries. So this is a crucial thing. And I for one think that the soft power will go farther than the hard documents, like forcing by trade or forcing by sanction, carrots or, stick, and getting them to sign or rectify the international agreement. Suppose they sign it, so what? Because the signed document will be in the cabinet and the minister will not care about it, and minister will not encourage his civil servants. You see, so earlier in my country, the terminology remind the consciousness of the people. When we say civil servants are aware that they are the servants of the people. Full stop. But now even the terminology has been changed. So then my solution, if I were given the chance to do that, let's take this Mekong River, and I would go for public consultation and awareness raising, and also capacity building trips from source to sea. And I will not insult any host nation. Even if they are terrible in my view, I would say they may have their own reason. So my view will not be forcefully overburden to the host country. So that is, we may call soft power. That is, we may call hydroinformatics approach. Our professor who created hydroinformatics subject previously created the modeling, mathematical modeling, numerical modeling. And after all, he said, I made a mess. I brought these models into this world, and now I really have to clean this mess. So what did he do is creating the hydroinformatics philosophy. The natural science and social science go hand in hand. And human being should also take care of the nature. So one of our panelists also said, the more we emphasize on human being, the more human beings feel that these natural resources are theirs and they can manage as they wish. No, we hire from our next generations, and our next generation will lose their home, only planet, if we do not take care of nature. So the whole curriculum of water education should be overhauled. And we are starting it. We start doing it by eco-civilization. If you have time, www.ecocivilization.eu. And that is where we gather million women plus the men supporters, and we start preaching. But now it's different. Earlier we preach and 80% of teachers do not follow their preaching. Do as I say, but I don't do it. But eco-civilization is not that. do as I do. So with this, I think the new leadership in the water sector and elsewhere, like circular economy. So you see this pollution and the quantity and quality affected are the result of the wrong decision making. So we have to go to press the button in the brain of the decision makers. Where are they? They are in 6 countries.
Yeah, amazing. I think you're right. So it's very important that, you know, to raise the public awareness and capacity building, education, you know, it's a process. It's not just a one-man show. You see, both states and non-state actors must be consulted to make a difference. Because at the end of the day, you know, it's not just the leaders of the country that needs the water for, you know, for economic purposes, but also the people at the grassroots level must have access to the clean and safe drinking water. I see that Adeel has a hand up. So Adeel, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, how are we on time, by the way?
I think a few
won't take much time.
We are past the time, but you know, but I'd be happy to stay, and we, you know, we're happy to have a discussion.
Okay. I'll be very quick. So because you were asking, going back to your question about impacts of dams, so I'll talk about both negative impacts and also the benefits. So you talked about 2, the impact on water resource and its availability, and also water quality. And in terms of water quality, it's typically the reduction of sediments which are coming through, and they're part of the ecosystem. And that leads to the third impact, which are the ecosystem impacts for where the reservoir is created, where the flow of the river is disrupted, and also the ecosystems get dissected many times, so that, for example, fish cannot get to you know, their migratory patterns. And the fourth negative impact is cultural impacts, and we've seen this in many of the large reservoirs, and the Three Gorges Dam in China comes to mind for obvious reasons, because it's the largest, where many of the cultural and historical sites were put underwater as the reservoirs was built. Now there is the flip side, and there is, by building these dams, you're protecting the downstream communities against flood. So you're sort of evening out these wild fluctuations in river flow. You can typically also generate energy, which obviously has economic benefits. And you're also creating water for irrigation in many cases. So you're sort of addressing this water energy food nexus. Now, the question is that, you know, there are these negative impacts and there are the positive impacts. Who gets to decide which one is more important? And the answer is that it's the stakeholders. And stakeholders have to be engaged more comprehensively. And this is the challenge, for example, for China when they plan these large dams, that if you're not including all the downstream stakeholders in your conversations, then the decision whether you're going to build a dam because of its benefits and you're overseeing or overlooking the negative impacts that might occur downstream. So that's the problem. You know, the stakeholders have to decide, and the stakeholders have to be viewed in a very comprehensive way. So you have to incorporate all the different riparians in that dialogue. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, very true, Adeel. It's important to include all the stakeholders. But the problem really arises is that there can be disputes, and that's where we have to overcome it. I think I have one more sort of a general question. I would probably ask Professor Khan maybe to say a few words on it, and then maybe Professor Chen can say a few words on it as well. So when we've been hearing about the transboundary water cooperation actually requires adoption of a multidisciplinary approach, because I do it myself as well and involve all the stakeholders, right? But for the sake of the audience, people who don't really know what it means, what does it practically mean? What do we need to do for this, Professor Khan?
If we can, anyone who can solve this problem of transboundary water management and dispute should deserve 2 Nobel Prizes, one for peace and the other one for science. So certainly, and knowledge. So it's really a tough one. And within the United Nations system, very hard to discuss. Over the years, listening to many experts like the ones here, one of the experts really stuck my mind, talking about transboundary water, one of very bright lawyers from University of London, constructive ambiguity. If we go by hard facts, it's not possible to solve or resolve, I would say. There is no solution, only resolution. Actually, I held a forum on that many, many years ago. So there are resolutions. We need to find a positive way forward. As Nini saying, no, don't blame anybody. But let's think about how stakeholders can come together and they can talk to each other in a positive way, building confidence, building shared vision. So there are not many river basins again. There are not many countries where water as a human right, I would say there is no country where water as a human right has been realized. But for a real, true, integrated water resource management, very good in theory, excellent for research in a university, but very hard to implement. So that's where we need to contribute. We have a river basin organization, Nini works with that, and I work with them. In Narbo, we have been working on such case studies. We have a very comprehensive set of integrated river basin management guidelines. We have done all of that. We have many good practices and examples, but when it comes to transboundary, how do we deal with the political aspect? Think about Indus, think about Chenab and Ravi and Pakistan and India. So there can be nuclear war there. And think about Nile, for example. So that's where there are different roles here. United Nations role is to bring the convening power. Let people come, sit together, discuss. We need experts like you and others who provide the knowledge in a way which can help promote dialogue. Then we need organizations, institutions which can help build capacity. Everyone must play their role. That's the only way we can bring water peace and peace for the world. Thank you very much. I just leave it here.
Thank you so much. Professor Chen, what do you think? Because your field is investment, what do you think from that perspective, how we bring people together? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. And also, I think it's a challenge, not only for China, but also for many other countries. But being an international lawyer, I would suggest that international cooperation is the first choice. And how to have this international cooperation, I think there could be two approaches. First is to conclude agreements or treaties, because all the riparian states, they can have treaties to state how to governance, how to use the water resources, and how to consort if there's any project like dams, some other reservoirs. Yeah, so I think this approach is very important. And in the whole world, including China, they also have got a lot of bilateral or multilateral treaties on those transboundary waters. And I think they do a good job. And then I think the other approach is to make institutional mechanism. Institutional mechanism, that means those riparian states, they can set up some kind of committees. And those committees, they can negotiate between the riparian states, and also they could suggest any solutions to any disputes concerning the use and the management of water resources. And some research before concerning transboundary waters. So I realized that China had got very good a good case for cooperation in the building of dam. That is the building of the dam of Congos between China and Kazakhstan. There's a river called Congress. And then both states, they invested together to build the dam, and then they share the water. And they distribute the water equally. And actually this benefits Kazakhstan. And another mechanism, I think it's a good thing, is just now Professor Adeel mentioned the Mekong River mechanism. Before, China was only an observer to the Mekong River Committee. And now China proposed to have the Mekong River Cooperation Mechanism. And then all the reference states, all the 6 reference states are within those mechanisms, and then they work together. So I think this is a very good platform for the stakeholders to negotiate and to tackle the issues. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think that obviously hearing from all of the experts like you yourselves, because you come from very disciplined, and I think that from your own discipline perspective, I think we need to. The idea is that we bring don't sort of press countries. Obviously, we need to implement policies using the soft power, and that's the only way forward, where we have multiple views from multiple people, and then of course we need to consider each one of them and negotiate more amicably, like you mentioned about the Lansang Nikong mechanism, like we have in place. Countries are willing actually to that's not just for the China, but all the countries are willing to listen to you if we use the soft powers, and that's actually the only way that the stakeholders can be brought together on a delicate issue like this. I think I heard from all the panelists, and it's amazing that what I heard, and it's a learning curve for me. I mean, I'm a international water law. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but international water law person, but also the transboundary boundary dispute. That I think that sometimes they go hand in hand. But I learned a lot from all of you. It's amazing. So now I will welcome each speaker. If you want to say anything finally, like a 1-minute concluding remark, if you have one. So I will let me hold Adeel first, followed by Professor Chen, then I will Professor Khan, then it will be Otto, and last but not the least, Nini. So to deliver their final 1-minute comment or anything that you want to say before we sort of leave. So Adeel, I'll let you go first. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fozia. Yeah, I think the one challenge that I think about is how do we water professionals maintain our optimism in this scenario? And there's so much negative news coming at us, in terms of what Shahbaz was just talking about, that how difficult it is to bring people together in a transboundary setting. What I've found is that there's always incremental improvements that we can look at and see how things are gradually improving. And I think that certainly is the case for Asia altogether. And I've been quite privileged to be a part of a group of experts who have put together 3 books on this nexus of water, energy, and food security in Asia, and we separated it by Central and South Asia, Asia Pacific region, and South and Southeast Asia. And what we are finding is that, of course, there's quite a lot of diversity in this huge region, both in terms of population and geography. But there's a lot of positive experiences that are coming forward. So that's what gives me optimism. So to our participants to this webinar, I would say also, yeah, let's keep our optimism in front of us all the time.
Thank you so much. I see that Otto has to leave, or probably he has left already, I'm not sure, because he's actually joining a conference. So let's see, I think that I'd like to go Huiping. You can, Professor Chen, do you have anything to say, the last words on this?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Fozia that today the webinar is really a learning opportunity for me. I learned a lot from all of you, and I also realized that water is essential to human survival. So it is not only a human right, it's related to almost everything. It's related to economy, culture, human rights, and the transported waters, foreign investment. It's related to everything. So I think the multidisciplinary approach is very important in the research of water-related issues, and also cooperation is also important. Cooperation among the reference states, cooperation between the scholars like today, I think it's really important, and it will really promote the understanding and the final realization of the human right to water. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Khan, you have the words, please.
Very simply, congratulations, wonderful forum. Just some final maybe words from, again, learning from everybody over time. We need to bring a synthesis. Synthesis is missing. ZAFAR mentioned a very, by the way, ZAFAR is my classmate from UVT Lahore, so we go a long way in our life. ZAFAR mentioned a very important synthesis which we have done, water, energy, food nexus, with Benno, one of our colleagues, driving it from UNESCO and ZAFAR. We need more synthesis. We need to bring this knowledge together. There is not enough knowledge for SDG 6, and especially water as a human right. So I strongly encourage universities, colleagues who are present here, to bring knowledge in research papers, peer-reviewed research papers, but also write more books. We are still missing many areas. So that's one. Also, South-South cooperation is a very important paradigm. Zafar mentioned it before as well. We need to realize it at researcher to researcher level. There are many UNESCO chairs, more than, I would say, 50 working in the area of water, more than 50 UNESCO water centers. There are UNU centers. We need to bring more of these colleagues together for South-South, North-South, and triangular cooperation. Finally, we must have more brilliant minds coming to water as a transdisciplinary initiative. Universities must encourage more PhD students in this area. China, a country which I serve now, is a wonderful country with amazing universities, with amazing resources. So how can we link with the Belt and Road Initiative, for example? Now there is a new initiative that that's where I will finish, where universities and everyone should play a very important. It's called Global Development Initiative, GDI. GDI is to help accelerate the Sustainable Development Goals. This is led by the Chinese government. So there are so many opportunities. We need to think innovatively, positively, optimistically, and link with each other and continue to synthesize. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Khan, for these stimulating comments. And last but not the least, and I will ask Mimi to say some few words.
Is it me?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. I actually written down on the chat, we need to recall the wisdom from all countries, the Chinese wisdom, Confucius, okay, and also Mr. Sun Yat-sen, etc. We cannot even complete the list. Western wisdom, the same. Asian wisdom, the same. If we go to religions, all the religion teach us how to conserve the environment, how to be human being, how to think positively. Therefore, I think we have to go back and revive our ancient wisdom and start behaving oneself. If I say I have to start from me and I cannot teach others if I don't do it. Therefore, this way, I think I am hopeful. And this is the positive note that I want to leave this webinar. Thank you to all the panelists and the moderator, and thank you to the City University.
Thank you so much, Mimi. I think that it's been wonderful hearing you all. And today we heard from the expert panels and, take different perspectives on what is a human right and how it's very important to have a critical reflection and discussion, which is a multidisciplinary across the disciplines, and take the stakeholders into consideration, but also have a human-centered perspective, because all, irrespective of, like Mini mentioned, irrespective of which culture we come from, you see, we need water. We are humans first, and that's what the approach should be. And therefore, human-based approach to water and sanitation actually helps development agencies actually systematically consider the rural, poor, and vulnerable, and that will increase the likelihood of access to clean water for all. And I think that we all realize that, and we do our bit, and that's the most we could do, and remain optimist as Nini and all of you actually mentioned. So it's just a wonderful panel. I'm really happy that I am here, and I heard your wonderful, insightful presentations today and remarks. And I will also take the opportunity to thank all of you for that, and time, because I see the time differences there, and also people who actually attended. So I take opportunity also to thank the CityU Public Law and Human Rights Forum for providing us a platform for discussing this very important issue, and also thank Christine Wu, who actually helped with the logistics of this webinar. So finally, if the other participants are okay with turning on their cameras, we could take an unforgettable, memorable picture together. So that would be wonderful. So if the people are okay to turn on their cameras, then we could take a picture together. Let's see. Okay, so Christine, could you help us with that, please? Thanks. I think it's all done. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your cooperation and being here. So with this, I declare the end of this event, and many thanks again, everyone. Take care, be safe, and have a pleasant evening or morning or daytime wherever you are. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.